Hey everyone, this video is the first of a series where I'm digitally inking the Shaded Grove and Xofl Fae Hound for the Mystic Punks RPG adventure Crackdown at Ivy Park, which will be available from Exalted Funeral in the near future. Benjamin Mara here, illustrator and cartoonist. Welcome to my channel where I record my art process and give insights about the projects I'm working on, with the hope you'll learn new techniques and be inspired to make your own art. So you can see here, this is like my pencil work, and then I'm just starting to lay in some inks. This is all done in Clip Studio Paint, my preferred inking application. I'm doing it on the iPad with the Apple Pencil. It's the iPad Pro from 2018. It is 12.9 screen size. I'm just going through and doing what I normally do, which is create the outlines for all of these figures and every sort of element that's in the picture before I start to render everything out. I should read the description of this image that I had to illustrate. A short distance from this clearing stands a dilapidated picnic pavilion. Rusty metal and stone posts hold up a sagging, mossy, shingled roof. Chained to the legs of a single metal table and grill is a group of 6 naked bodies shaking in terror. The table's top has strange utensils laid out as if ready for surgery. Heavy smoke curls around the prisoners that billows from a grove of trees behind the pavilion. The smell of strong incense and congealing blood gags you as fire inexplicably erupts from the iron grill. The giggling heard earlier gives way to snarls of bloodlust as a large dog-like beast creeps from the smoke. The creature stops in front of the prisoners and with a low growl bares its hideous fangs at you. The hound towers in size and dwarfs even the largest canine. Smooth, short, black fur accentuates its veins and muscles. Its red eyes lock on the punks while strings of rank saliva drip on the ground. This is a pretty complicated scene. There's a lot going on here, and one of the things that I initially tried to do with this scene was play it kind of straight and put everything into a rigid kind of perspective environment where it kind of looked like really pedestrian and mundane. And that was my first attempt, and I was just sort of thinking about it, and I was like studying those pencils, and I just was like, this is not working. So I decided to change course, and I repenciled the whole thing out before I started inking it, and I wanted to give it less of a strict perspective, less of kind of like an environment that you feel like you could walk into. Like my initial pencils were just of, everything full figured. You saw the grill to the side. It was more at a distance. It was more of like a long shot, and you could kind of see the hound in the distance, and you could gauge the scale of the hound, because at a further distance, if the camera, quote unquote camera, is at a further distance, you can kind of like really accentuate the scale of things to greater effect. But I decided it's like not as an exciting an image to do it that way. So I repenciled it, and this is what I sort of came up with. And I wanted it to be more of like this Mannerist style, this kind of like Baroque style of composition where maybe perspective doesn't matter, maybe gravity doesn't really matter. It's more about like the emotional state of the characters in this environment. Not everything really has to make sense. I mean, maybe if you happen to come across this scene, in a game, it wouldn't make sense to you initially, so not everything has to be perfect, including like these hands that I'm drawing, like these gnarled claws. I don't really like to bind myself to things like perspective or to proper proportion of figures either, because I think that you can lose a lot of interesting qualities if you go down that road. There are artists though that I love that do very generic, very precise proportion work, and that's one of the reasons why I love like early Valiant comics, is because a lot of those artists are adhering to this very strict guidelines that I'm sure came down from Jim Shooter, to have these full figure panels and every figure is perfectly proportioned proportioned. The results are, things look rather stiff and look rather lifeless or without any sort of kind of character. But I think that Shooter's philosophy stems from really being obsessed with Steve Ditko, and you can't really fault anyone for that sort of thing. I love sort of stiff comic book artwork with really, really precise proportion, but it just didn't work for this particular image and couldn't go down that road. Even though I penciled it out, I just was like, no, it's not going to work. So I repenciled it. Yeah, and here we are. Now I'm inking, and I'm using just the stiff nib from Friendin. I deviate sometimes from this nib pen. It's funny because there's literally hundreds of brushes that I think he's developed, and I only use 2 or 3 of them. But sometimes it takes, experimenting with a dozen or 2 dozen of these brushes to really find the ones that you like and that really, speak to you or sing to you. So I'm just going in and making up all these hands. You can obviously see that I don't pencil out how the hands kind of give impressions of kind of where these things are going to fall, and then I make them up all with the ink. And it's not too different from how I do things traditionally. I don't usually pencil things out. I just let myself make things up with that ink. A lot of the time I just find it to be more efficient. It's faster, it's more fun. I don't like to plan things out too much. I think it really kills my excitement for things and sense of discovery for things. And weird things can kind of happen, like the shape of this mouth or this woman is kind of off, and kind of like how it's off, and her face is kind of off, and I like that too. So that kind of inspires me to keep going, entertains me while I'm working. Let's see what happens next with the ink. Nothing's sort of set in stone yet, and even with the ink, I mean, even when you're working traditionally you can always use whiteout or something like that, but with digital inks it's even more flexible because you can just either do the undo button or you can erase things so easily. It's so malleable, and you're not affecting the surface in any way if you are going in and whiting things out digitally. Whereas if you white things out on a piece of Bristol board, it changes the surface, and the surface changes, how the ink lays down changes. So I love using whiteout, and I think it's really great to use on traditional media. And an inker like Klaus Janson or Bill Sienkiewicz, they use it to great effect. And just studying those guys made me sort of think, it changed my wiring about how I thought about inking. Inking is less about drawing, so it's almost like painting with lines now. It's not drawing with lines anymore, because it's this dialogue between adding and removing, adding light, adding shadow, taking away light. It becomes this sort of sculpting with line that I really love. And if you're using a brush, it's sculpting with the brush stroke. This nib is almost like a brush. Now I'm just adding in, just making up these scary kind of implements that might be used for torture. Since this is pretty horror based adventure, I'm trying to use some EC Comics vibes here, Wally Wood or Graham Ingalls, or trying to really pump up that kind of aspect of the feel and vibe of these illustrations, which is one reason why I'm using this heavy brush line. Recently I've really been into a kind of a dead line without much feathering, just using big black shapes. One of my favorite art pieces or things in the world really is the X-Men the Animated Series, because I love the way that they use shadow in animation for that series. I've never seen an animation series use black shadow as much as that series did. I think it's really hard to animate that many shadows on a figure. It's just way more efficient and economical to not put in these huge black shadows on people or on characters in animated television shows. I don't know, it's just crazy that they did that, but I love the results and I'm really inspired by the results. I'm really happy that they did decide to do that, because it's really had a profound effect on me and the art that I create, and inspiring me to make stuff. So this is a really complicated image. It's not going to look like an animated series at all. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please hit the like and subscribe buttons. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'll see you in the next video.